Babylon 1158 BC. The Elamite king Shutruk-Nahunte stands before the greatest city in the ancient world, watching his soldiers carry away something beyond price. The statue of Marduk himself, Babylon's patron god. Behind them come thousands more treasures, the Code of Hammurabi, carved 600 years earlier, royal monuments documenting centuries of history, cult statues of every major deity. An entire civilization is being loaded onto carts and dragged away to Susa. This moment marks the end of the Kassite dynasty, foreign mountain warriors who had ruled Mesopotamia for over 400 years, longer than any other dynasty, foreign or native, in Babylonian history. But how did mysterious tribesmen from the Zagros Mountains come to rule the world's most sophisticated civilization? The answer begins in those rugged peaks, centuries before Babylon fell. The Zagros Mountains of western Iran harbored one of ancient Mesopotamia's most enigmatic peoples during the early 2nd millennium BC. These weren't the flat river valleys where civilization supposedly began. These were defensive ridges, fertile mountain basins, and strategic passes where the Kassites first established their distinctive way of life round 1800 BC. Archaeological excavations at sites like Godin Tepe have revealed their material culture. Distinctive greyware pottery with burnished surfaces and geometric patterns completely unlike anything made in Mesopotamia, bronze weapons with unique decorative motifs, and rectangular mud brick houses arranged around courtyards with thick defensive walls. These weren't primitive nomads, they were sophisticated mountain dwellers who understood metallurgy, agriculture, and warfare. The settlement patterns revealed through surveys across the central Zagros show the Kassites preferred elevated locations commanding strategic views of mountain passes and river valleys. At Godin Tepe, archaeologists uncovered storage facilities containing large ceramic jars, evidence these communities maintained agricultural surpluses beyond simple survival. Bronze workshops produced distinctive daggers and spearheads with elaborate hilts featuring geometric patterns and animal motifs that would later appear in Kassite royal iconography when they ruled Babylonia. The bronze metallurgy was exceptional. These weapons became legendary for their quality throughout the ancient Near East. But the Kassites themselves remained mysterious. Their language didn't belong to any known family. Their origins were unclear. And their destiny? Nobody could have predicted they would rule Mesopotamia longer than Rome ruled Britain. The Kassite language presents one of the most perplexing puzzles of the ancient Near East. Unlike the Semitic languages dominating Mesopotamian civilization, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, or the Indo-European tongues spoken by many contemporaries, Kassite belongs to neither major language family. It stands alone, isolated, mysterious. The surviving corpus of Kassite words, preserved primarily in Akkadian texts and personal names, reveals a language with distinctive sounds and grammatical structures that resist easy classification. Akkadian scribes struggled to render Kassite sounds in cuneiform, leading to wildly inconsistent spellings across different archives. So this linguistic evidence suggests the Kassites maintained their native tongue alongside Akkadian throughout their centuries ruling Babylonia, creating a bilingual administrative culture unique in the ancient world. Analysis of Kassite personal names provides the richest linguistic data, with hundreds of examples preserved in cuneiform archives. These names frequently contain elements referring to Kassite deities like Shukamuna and Shumalia, combined with words denoting kinship, natural phenomena, or desirable qualities. Names like Kashtiliash and Bernaburiash demonstrate complex word-building processes governing Kassite name formation. Some scholars have proposed distant relationships to Elamite or hypothetical substrate languages of the Zagros region, but these connections remain speculative. It's the isolation of Kassite within the linguistic landscape reinforces the distinct cultural identity of these mountain people. They were truly outsiders, speaking a language nobody else understood, worshipping gods nobody else recognized, following customs that bewildered their Mesopotamian neighbors. The social organization of early Kassite communities centered on kinship-based, tribal structures that would persist throughout their history. Archaeological evidence suggests highland settlements organized around extended family compounds with multiple generations sharing residential complexes arranged around central courtyards. The distribution of prestige goods and burial practices indicates emerging social stratification, certain individuals gaining access to imported materials and elaborate grave goods. But the backbone of Kassite life was pastoral economy, extensive evidence for sheep and goat herding supplemented by limited agriculture in suitable valleys. Faunal remains from excavated sites show high percentages of sheep and goat bones, indicating the central importance of these animals for meat, milk, wool, and hides. The seasonal movement of flocks between highland summer pastures and lowland winter grazing fostered familiarity with geographical routes that would later facilitate Kassite expansion into Mesopotamia. The transition from purely nomadic pastoralism to semi-sedentary life occurred gradually during the early 2nd millennium BC, driven by population growth and increasing contact with settled agricultural communities. Permanent winter settlements in protected valleys allowed storage of surplus pastoral products and development of craft specializations. These fixed bases also served as centers for trade networks connecting the Zagros highlands with the Mesopotamian plains. The Kassites were developing sophisticated resource management techniques, seasonal shelters, water management systems, storage facilities. Stone circular structures found at highland sites likely served as temporary shelters during migrations, while substantial rectangular buildings in valleys housed extended families during winter. The stage was being set, but nobody in Mesopotamia was paying attention to these mountain warriors. That would prove a fatal mistake. The earliest documented contacts between Kassites and Mesopotamian civilizations occurred during the latter part of the Old Babylonian period, as cuneiform sources begin mentioning Kassite individuals in various capacities. These initial references appear in administrative texts from sites like Sippar and Babylon, where Kassites are recorded as workers, soldiers, and occasionally landowners. The gradual nature of this infiltration suggests peaceful integration rather than sudden conquest, individuals and small groups establishing themselves in rural areas before gradually moving into urban centers. This was immigration, not invasion. Yet, Kassite military service in Babylonian armies provided crucial opportunities for advancement and integration. Their reputation as skilled warriors, honed through generations of tribal warfare in the mountains, made them valuable additions to royal forces. Babylonian kings increasingly relied on Kassite mercenaries and auxiliaries, particularly during conflicts with neighboring powers like Elam and Assyria. Land grants and royal patronage facilitated Kassite settlement as Babylonian rulers sought to strengthen their military forces through incorporating capable foreign elements. Marriage alliances between Kassite families and established Babylonian lineages cemented these relationships, creating networks of mutual obligation. The Kassites were slowly, methodically building power within the system. Religious syncretism played a crucial role in Kassite integration. They adopted Mesopotamian deities while maintaining their traditional pantheon, a flexible approach allowing full participation in Babylonian society while preserving cultural identity. Temples dedicated to both Kassite and Mesopotamian gods appeared in areas of heavy Kassite settlement, reflecting the hybrid nature of their religious practices. The agricultural knowledge Kassites brought from their mountain homeland proved valuable in Mesopotamian contexts, particularly in irrigation management and livestock husbandry. Their expertise in horse breeding and training would later become legendary, contributing to military innovations that enhanced Babylonian power. The gradual accumulation of land holdings and economic resources positioned successful Kassite families for eventual political prominence. They were patient, they were strategic, and they were waiting for their opportunity. That opportunity came through Babylon's spectacular collapse. The death of Hammurabi in 1750 BC marked the beginning of inexorable decline for the old Babylonian Empire that would ultimately create conditions for Kassite ascendancy. His successor, Samsu-iluna, inherited a vast domain stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Euphrates Bend, but the administrative and military challenges of maintaining such an extensive realm quickly became apparent. Within the first decade of his 48-year reign, Samsu-iluna faced widespread rebellions across southern Babylonia. Cities like Ur, Uruk, and Larsa broke away from central control, establishing independent dynasties. The empire was fragmenting. The Sealand dynasty emerged in the marshy regions of southern Mesopotamia, cutting Babylon off from maritime trade routes through the Persian Gulf. This breakaway state maintained independence for over a century, creating a persistent drain on Babylonian military resources and economic vitality. Archaeological evidence from sites like Ur shows marked decline in monumental construction and luxury goods. Formerly prosperous southern cities were dying. The empire that Hammurabi built was coming apart. And the Kassites were watching carefully, learning every weakness, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Samsu-iluna's military campaigns to restore central authority proved increasingly costly and ultimately unsuccessful. Cuneiform chronicles describe his forces burning rebellious cities and deporting populations, but these harsh measures only destabilized the empire's economic foundations further. The destruction of Ur around 1740 BC, documented in both archaeological layers and contemporary texts, eliminated one of Mesopotamia's most ancient commercial centers and disrupted trade networks that had functioned for millennia. The reign of Abi-Eshu witnessed continued territorial losses as Assyrian expansion began encroaching on northern Babylonian territories. Administrative texts reveal desperate attempts to maintain control through increased taxation and corvée labor obligations, policies that only accelerated internal decay. The once efficient bureaucratic system established by Hammurabi was breaking down. Ammi-Dittana's accession in 1683 BC brought temporary stabilization through diplomatic marriages and tributary arrangements with former rebellious cities. But these measures represented accommodation to weakness rather than restoration of strength. His building inscriptions, while maintaining traditional royal rhetoric, describe much more modest construction projects compared to earlier Babylonian monarchs. The famous Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, compiled during his successor's reign, reflects continued importance of astronomical observation and divination, but also suggests a court increasingly concerned with predicting and averting disasters rather than confidently planning military campaigns. They were reading omens desperately, trying to understand why the gods had abandoned them. The final century of the old Babylonian dynasty under Amisaduqa and Samsu-Dittana saw the empire contract to a rump state centered on Babylon itself and its immediate hinterland. Provincial archives from sites like Sippar show declining administrative activity and increasing references to foreign mercenaries and auxiliaries in royal service. These texts mention Kassite individuals with increasing frequency, often in military contexts or as recipients of land grants in sparsely populated rural areas. The Kassites were becoming essential to Babylon's survival, and everyone knew it. The writing was on the wall. But the final blow came from an unexpected direction. The catastrophic Hittite raid on Babylon in 1595 BC under Mursili delivered the death blow to the dynasty that had ruled Mesopotamia for 3 centuries. Hittite annals describe this campaign as a lightning strike designed to eliminate a potential rival and secure valuable plunder rather than establish permanent control. Mursili's forces advanced down the Euphrates Valley, bypassing heavily fortified positions and striking directly at the imperial capital before Babylonian forces could mount effective defense. The sack of Babylon proved devastating both symbolically and practically. Hittite forces carried away the cult statue of Marduk along with enormous quantities of precious metals and luxury goods. Contemporary texts describe the removal of the god's statue as a cosmic catastrophe that left the city spiritually defenseless and politically illegitimate. The Babylonian Chronicles' notation that Mursili marched against Babylon and captured Babylon understates the profound psychological impact of this humiliation. Archaeological evidence from Babylon's palace quarter reveals extensive destruction layers dating to this period, with burned administrative archives and collapsed mud brick walls testifying to the thoroughness of Hittite demolition. The loss of royal archives disrupted administrative continuity and eliminated institutional memory accumulated over generations. Craftsmen's quarters show similar destruction patterns suggesting systematic looting and deportation or flight of skilled artisans. Babylon was finished, and then something remarkable happened. The Hittites left. They just walked away. And into that power vacuum stepped the Kassites. The Hittite withdrawal from Babylon created an unprecedented power vacuum in central Mesopotamia that neither the Sealand dynasty nor Assyria possessed sufficient resources to fill immediately. This interregnum period, lasting approximately 3 decades, witnessed the emergence of multiple competing authorities and the breakdown of centralized administration across much of Babylonia. Local city governors, tribal chieftains, and military commanders established autonomous territories while nominally acknowledging distant overlords who lacked effective enforcement mechanisms. It was chaos, pure chaos, and the Kassites were positioned perfectly to exploit it. Kassite infiltration into this chaotic landscape began as a gradual process of individual and small group settlement rather than organized military conquest. Administrative texts from Nippur and other surviving archives record increasing numbers of Kassite personal names among property owners, craftsmen, and agricultural workers during the late 17th and early 16th centuries BC. These individuals entered Babylonian society through various channels: military service, intermarriage with local families, and direct land grants from struggling local authorities. This wasn't invasion. It was something far more effective. It was systematic, patient infiltration over generations. By the time Babylonians realized what was happening, the Kassites were already everywhere. The earliest identifiable Kassite leaders in Babylonia emerge from the documentary record during this transitional period, though their exact relationships to the later royal dynasty remain uncertain. Gandash, traditionally considered the founder of the Kassite dynasty, appears in later king lists but lacks contemporary documentation from his supposed reign period. This absence suggests either that his authority remained localized and unofficial, or that later Kassite scribes retroactively elevated a tribal chieftain to royal status for dynastic legitimacy. More reliably documented is Agum-Ber, whose inscriptions describe military campaigns against Elamite territories and restoration of religious sites in northern Babylonia. His building activities at Dur-Kurigalzu and other locations indicate control over substantial resources and organized labor forces, suggesting successful consolidation of Kassite authority over significant territorial holdings. The process of Kassite territorial expansion followed river valleys and major trade routes, with initial settlements concentrated along the Tigris and Euphrates systems where agricultural productivity remained high despite political instability. Cuneiform land sale documents from this period record Kassite individuals purchasing properties in established agricultural districts, often from Babylonian families facing economic hardship. These transactions suggest peaceful integration rather than violent dispossession, with Kassite newcomers adopting established land tenure systems and legal procedures. They weren't destroying Babylonian civilization, they were becoming it. Kassite military organization during this infiltration period blended traditional tribal structure with Mesopotamian administrative practices. Archaeological evidence from fortified sites reveals defensive installations combining mountain warfare techniques with lowland architectural traditions. These hybrid fortifications featured thick mud brick walls reinforced with stone foundations, arrow slits positioned for mounted archery, and internal layouts accommodating both infantry and cavalry units. The integration of Kassite military units into existing Babylonian defensive systems proceeded gradually, with local commanders increasingly relying on Kassite expertise in horse breeding and cavalry tactics. Their superior horsemanship, developed through generations of mountain pastoralism, gave them significant advantages in the fluid military situation of post-conquest Babylonia. What happened next would change everything, because one Kassite king was about to do something unprecedented, something that would legitimize Kassite rule forever. The consolidation of Kassite authority in Babylonia reached its decisive phase during the reign of Agum II, known by his full royal name, Agum Kakrim, who transformed scattered tribal settlements into a unified kingdom capable of claiming legitimate succession to the ancient Mesopotamian imperial tradition. Archaeological evidence from Dur-Kurigalzu and contemporary administrative archives indicates that Agum II's reign around 1570 BC marked the transition from opportunistic settlement to systematic state-building across the Babylonian heartland. This was the moment. This was when everything changed. Agum II inherited a patchwork of Kassite-controlled territories extending from the middle Euphrates Valley to the Diyala River basin, but lacking the symbolic legitimacy and administrative cohesion necessary for effective governance over diverse Mesopotamian populations. His predecessors had established military control through combination of conquest and negotiated settlement, yet the absence of traditional Mesopotamian royal regalia and divine sanction left their authority vulnerable to challenge. The most pressing challenge facing the early Kassite state was the restoration of Marduk's cult statue to Babylon, which had remained in Hittite custody since Mursili's devastating raid nearly 3 decades earlier. Without Marduk, there was no legitimate king of Babylon, period. Contemporary religious texts describe the spiritual crisis gripping Babylonian society during this period, with traditional festivals suspended and temple revenues declining as worshippers questioned the god's abandonment of his ancient city. The Kassite rulers recognized that their political legitimacy depended fundamentally on demonstrating their capacity to restore cosmic order through Marduk's return. This wasn't just politics, this was theology. This was proving that the gods accepted Kassite rule. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in the Hattusa archives reveals the complex negotiations Agum II conducted with the Hittite court to secure Marduk's release. These tablets, written in Akkadian diplomatic language, show the Kassite king offering substantial tribute payments, precious metals, exotic woods from the Zagros Mountains, and high-quality horses bred in Kassite territories. The Hittite response demonstrates their recognition of Kassite legitimacy as Babylon's rightful rulers, addressing Agum II with traditional royal epithets reserved for great kings of major powers. The physical recovery of Marduk's statue required extensive logistical preparation, as the sacred image needed to travel safely from Anatolia to Babylon while maintaining ritual purity throughout the journey. Cuneiform records describe construction of a specially designed, wheeled shrine covered with precious metals and protective amulets, drawn by white oxen selected according to ancient divination procedures. The procession route followed major trade highways through northern Syria and down the Euphrates Valley, with local rulers providing provisions and military escorts to ensure the gods' safe passage. Picture this. the most important religious object in Mesopotamian civilization, traveling hundreds of miles protected by Kassite warriors returning home after 3 decades of exile. Agum II's inscription commemorating Marduk's return, carved on stone tablets discovered in Babylon's Esagila temple complex, provides detailed information about the elaborate ceremonies marking this pivotal moment. The text describes how the king personally received the statue at Babylon's gates, performing traditional purification rituals before escorting Marduk to his restored sanctuary. The inscription emphasizes Agum II's role as the god's chosen representative, using formulaic language directly echoing earlier Babylonian royal texts, while incorporating distinctively Kassite elements. The Kassites had done it. They had brought Marduk home, and with that single act, they became the legitimate rulers of Babylon. The religious restoration ceremony extended over several weeks, with daily offerings and ritual performances designed to re-establish Marduk's presence in his earthly dwelling. Temple accounts from this period record massive expenditures on sacrificial animals, incense, precious textiles, and ceremonial vessels, indicating the enormous resources Agum II devoted to legitimizing his rule through divine approval. The participation of priests from throughout Babylonia in these ceremonies created a network of religious officials with vested interests in supporting Kassite authority. Archaeological excavations in Babylon's temple quarter reveal extensive reconstruction work dating to Agum II's reign, with new foundations laid for damaged shrines and expanded facilities for ritual activities. The architectural style of these renovations combines traditional Mesopotamian temple design with innovations reflecting Kassite building techniques learned in their mountain homeland. The successful restoration of Marduk's cult transformed Agum II from tribal chieftain into legitimate Mesopotamian monarch, enabling him to implement comprehensive administrative reforms that would define Kassite governmental practice for the next 4 centuries. His reorganization of the provincial system maintained basic territorial divisions established by earlier Babylonian rulers, while introducing new administrative positions specifically designed to accommodate Kassite nobles and military commanders within the existing bureaucratic hierarchy. The office of Shakanakku, provincial governor, underwent significant modification under Agum II's reforms, with appointments increasingly going to Kassite aristocrats, who possessed both military experience and familiarity with local conditions. And these officials retained traditional responsibilities for tax collection, judicial administration, and military recruitment, but operated within a modified command structure emphasizing personal loyalty to the king rather than institutional continuity. Land tenure arrangements established during Agum II's reign created a hybrid system, preserving existing property rights while accommodating Kassite settlement patterns and social organization. Royal land grants documented in cuneiform legal archives show systematic allocation of agricultural estates to Kassite military officers and tribal leaders, often in areas that had been abandoned during political chaos following Babylon's fall. And these grants typically included not only cultivated fields but also pasture rights and water access privileges, essential for maintaining the mixed agricultural pastoral economy that Kassites practiced. The integration of Kassite nobility with established Babylonian aristocratic families proceeded through carefully arranged marriage alliances that created kinship networks spanning both communities. Cuneiform marriage contracts from this period reveal sophisticated negotiations involving bride prices, dowry arrangements, and inheritance provisions designed to merge Kassite and Babylonian property holdings. Judicial administration under Agum II combined Mesopotamian legal precedents with Kassite customary law, creating a flexible system capable of addressing disputes involving members of both communities. Court records from major cities show mixed tribunals including both Babylonian legal scholars and Kassite tribal elders, with decisions rendered according to the cultural background of parties involved. This pluralistic approach to legal administration prevented cultural conflicts that might otherwise have undermined Kassite authority among Babylonian populations. But legitimacy alone wasn't enough. The Kassites needed military power, and what they developed would revolutionize warfare throughout the ancient Near East. The military organization that emerged during Agum II's reign represented a fundamental innovation in Mesopotamian warfare, combining traditional infantry formations with Kassite cavalry units and mountain warfare techniques. Archaeological evidence from military installations along the kingdom's borders reveals fortifications designed to accommodate both foot soldiers and mounted troops, with specialized facilities for horse breeding and training. These defensive positions featured multiple defensive circuits, allowing defenders to conduct fighting withdrawals while maintaining communication with supporting units. The Kassites were creating something new, a military machine that would dominate Mesopotamia for centuries. Kassite military reforms introduced systematic cavalry training programs that transformed warfare throughout the region, with neighboring powers eventually adopting similar mounted units to counter Babylonian advantages. Training manuals preserved in cuneiform archives describe elaborate procedures for breeding war horses, selecting suitable mounts for different types of combat, and coordinating cavalry charges with infantry advances. The emphasis on individual horsemanship skills reflected traditional Kassite values while serving practical military requirements in the fluid tactical situations of ancient warfare. This wasn't just about horses, this was about creating an entirely new way of fighting that gave the Kassites decisive advantages over traditional Mesopotamian infantry-focused armies. The development of a hybrid ruling class under Agum II's administration created lasting institutional structures that would characterize Kassite governance throughout their dynastic period. Royal inscriptions describe a court hierarchy that included both traditional Mesopotamian officials like the Sukalu and distinctively Kassite positions such as the Bel Pahete, who supervised pastoral territories and nomadic populations. This dual administrative structure allowed the kingdom to govern settled agricultural communities according to established precedents, while maintaining effective control over mobile populations that had previously operated outside centralized authority. Educational institutions established during this period produced a generation of bilingual administrators capable of maintaining governmental functions in both Akkadian and Kassite languages. The economic policies implemented by Agum II's government reflected the hybrid nature of Kassite society, with traditional Mesopotamian commercial practices adapted to accommodate pastoral production and mountain trade networks. Royal edicts preserved in temple archives describe standardized weights and measures for livestock products, regulated seasonal markets for pastoral goods, and established trade agreements with mountain communities that had previously operated outside Babylonian commercial systems. These innovations expanded the kingdom's economic base while maintaining the agricultural productivity that supported urban populations. Temple administration under Kassite rule maintained traditional Mesopotamian religious practices while incorporating Kassite deities into the official pantheon, creating a syncretic system that satisfied both communities' spiritual needs. The architectural projects undertaken during Agum II's reign demonstrate the synthesis of Mesopotamian and Kassite building traditions that would characterize the dynasty's monumental construction throughout their rule. Excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu reveal palace complexes featuring traditional Mesopotamian courtyard layouts enhanced with Kassite innovations, including elevated throne rooms, specialized horse facilities, and defensive features adapted from mountain fortress design. These structures served both practical administrative functions and symbolic purposes, displaying Kassite power while respecting established architectural conventions. The death of Agum Seku around 1545 BC marked the end of the foundational phase of Kassite rule, but what came next would be even more spectacular. The Kassites were about to enter their golden age, a period of unprecedented prosperity that would make Babylonia one of the ancient world's great powers, and it would all center around one man and one extraordinary city that he would build from nothing. The reign of Kurigalzu, beginning around 1400 BC, marked the Kassite dynasty's greatest territorial extent and cultural flowering. Kurigalzu inherited a kingdom that had successfully integrated Kassite and Babylonian populations into a functioning administrative system, but his ambitions extended far beyond maintaining existing achievements. Contemporary royal inscriptions describe his vision of creating a new imperial capital that would rival the greatest cities of the ancient world, while serving as a symbol of Kassite power and cultural sophistication. The location he selected for this monumental project lay approximately 30 kilometers west of modern Baghdad, at a site the Kassites named Dur Kurigalzu, Fortress of Kurigalzu. The construction of Dur Kurigalzu represented the most ambitious building project undertaken in Mesopotamia since the great ziggurat complexes of the Third Dynasty of nearly 8 centuries earlier. Archaeological excavations have revealed a planned city covering over 225 hectares, with massive mud brick walls rising to heights of 15 meters and defensive towers positioned at regular intervals along the perimeter. The city's layout followed a sophisticated urban planning scheme combining traditional Mesopotamian architectural principles with innovations reflecting Kassite cultural preferences and military requirements. This wasn't just a city, this was a statement. This was the Kassites announcing to the entire world that they had arrived as a major power. The royal palace complex at Dur Kurigalzu occupied the city's highest elevation, with throne rooms, administrative offices and residential quarters arranged around multiple courtyards paved with fired bricks bearing Kurigalzu's royal inscriptions. The throne room itself measured 45 meters in length and featured walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting Kassite royal symbols, mythological creatures, and tribute-bearing delegations from subject territories. Excavated fragments of these reliefs show sophisticated artistic techniques combining Mesopotamian iconographic traditions with distinctive Kassite stylistic elements, particularly in rendering horses and mountain landscapes. The administrative quarter housed the kingdom's central bureaucracy, with archive rooms containing thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting every aspect of governmental activity, tax records showing systematic collection of agricultural surplus, military documents detailing cavalry organization, procurement records for horses from Zagros breeding centers. The city's religious precincts centered on a massive ziggurat dedicated to Enlil, the ancient Mesopotamian god of air and authority, whose cult Kurigalzu promoted as part of his efforts to legitimize Kassite rule through association with traditional religious practices. The ziggurat's base measured 90 meters on each side and rose in 7 stages to approximately 60 meters, making it one of the tallest structures in ancient Mesopotamia. Bitumen waterproofing between brick courses and internal drainage systems demonstrated advanced engineering techniques, ensuring the structure's stability despite the region's challenging environmental conditions. Surrounding the main ziggurat, Kurigalzu constructed temples dedicated to both Mesopotamian and Kassite deities, creating a religious complex serving the spiritual needs of the kingdom's diverse population. The Temple of Shukamuna, the principal Kassite god, featured architectural elements unknown in traditional Mesopotamian religious buildings, elevated platforms for fire altars, and specialized chambers for ritual activities involving horses and other animals sacred to mountain peoples. Excavated cult objects from these temples include bronze figurines of horses with elaborate decorative harnesses, stone reliefs depicting mountain hunting scenes, and ceramic vessels shaped like animals native to the Zagros highlands. Dur Kurigalzu wasn't just beautiful, it was functional, and it was about to become the center of an economic empire. The economic foundation of Kurigalzu's building projects rested on Babylonia's strategic position, controlling trade routes, connecting the Iranian plateau with the Mediterranean coast. Dur-Kurigalzu's location provided direct access to both the Tigris and Euphrates river systems, while commanding overland routes that carried luxury goods between the major commercial centers of the ancient world. Customs records from the city's gates document the passage of caravans carrying lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, tin from Anatolia, cedarwood from Lebanon, and gold from Nubia, with royal officials collecting substantial revenues through taxation of this international commerce. The wealth was staggering. The development of specialized craft quarters within Dur-Kurigalzu reflected the kingdom's growing prosperity and cultural sophistication. Archaeological evidence reveals workshops producing luxury goods, combining traditional Mesopotamian techniques with Kassite innovations, particularly in metalworking and textile production. Bronze foundries discovered in the city's industrial district used advanced smelting techniques to produce weapons and ornamental objects traded throughout the Near East. The quality of Kassite metalwork became legendary among contemporary civilizations, with Babylonian bronze items appearing in royal tombs from Egypt to Iran. Textile production at Dur-Kurigalzu incorporated wool from the kingdom's extensive pastoral territories, with imported materials like silk from Central Asia and cotton from India. Loom weights and dyeing vats found in residential areas indicate cloth production occurred at both household and industrial scales, with royal workshops producing ceremonial garments for the court and diplomatic gifts for foreign rulers. Cuneiform texts describe Kassite textiles decorated with intricate patterns featuring horses, mountains, and celestial symbols that reflected the dynasty's cultural heritage while appealing to international markets. The craftsmanship was exquisite. These weren't just functional items, they were works of art that proclaimed Kassite sophistication to every foreign court that received them. The Kassites had transformed from mountain warriors into sophisticated cultural patrons. But their greatest achievement was still to come. The reign of Burnaburiash Theku, beginning around 1315 BC, marked the apex of Kassite diplomatic influence and international prestige. His accession coincided with a period of intense diplomatic activity throughout the ancient Near East, as the major powers, Egypt, Assyria, Mitanni, and Hatti, engaged in complex negotiations over territorial boundaries, trade rights, and dynastic marriages. The Amarna letters discovered in the ruins of Akhenaten's capital in Egypt preserve extensive correspondence between Burnaburiash II and the Egyptian pharaohs Amenhotep III and Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, providing remarkable insight into Bronze Age international relations. But these letters reveal something extraordinary. The Kassites were now equals with the most powerful kingdoms on earth. The diplomatic correspondence between Burnaburiash Theku and Amenhotep III reveals a relationship between equals, with both rulers addressing each other as brother and exchanging lavish gifts, demonstrating their kingdom's wealth and cultural achievements. A letter from Burnaburiash II to the Egyptian pharaoh describes the dispatch of a diplomatic mission carrying 20 talents of lapis lazuli, 15 high-quality horses with golden bridles, and ceremonial weapons decorated with precious stones. The Egyptian response mentions reciprocal gifts including gold jewelry, ivory objects, and exotic animals from Africa, establishing a pattern of competitive generosity that characterized relations between Bronze Age superpowers. And this was diplomatic theater on a grand scale, but beneath the gift-giving and formal rhetoric lay serious business. The Kassites were negotiating their place in a complex international order, and they were doing it brilliantly. The correspondence also documents complex negotiations over the safety of merchants traveling between Babylonia and Egypt, with Burnaburiash II complaining about attacks on Babylonian caravans in territories controlled by Egyptian vassals. His letter demands compensation for stolen goods and guarantees of safe passage for future commercial expeditions, demonstrating the importance of international trade to the Kassite kingdom's economic prosperity. The detailed inventories of stolen merchandise mentioned in these diplomatic protests provide valuable information about the types of goods moving along ancient trade networks. Marriage diplomacy played a crucial role in Bernaburiash II's foreign policy, with negotiations for dynastic unions serving both to cement political alliances and to enhance royal prestige through association with ancient and powerful ruling houses. The Amarna correspondence includes discussions about a proposed marriage between a Kassite princess and an Egyptian prince, with extensive negotiations over the bride's dowry, the status of her retinue, and the religious practices she would be permitted to maintain in her new homeland. These marriage negotiations reveal the complex cultural considerations that influenced international relations in the ancient world. The relationship between Bernaburiash II and Akhenaten proved more challenging than the cordial exchanges with Amenhotep III, as the Egyptian pharaoh's religious reforms and political innovations disrupted established diplomatic protocols. Bernaburiash II's letters to Akhenaten express frustration with reduced gift exchanges and delayed responses to Babylonian diplomatic initiatives, suggesting that Egypt's internal religious upheaval affected its international relationships. The Kassite king's complaint about the quality of gold received from Egypt, "The gold which my brother sends is not good. When placed in the fire, it does not come out like real gold," demonstrates the detailed attention ancient rulers paid to the symbolic value of diplomatic gifts. This wasn't petty complaining, this was serious diplomacy. Gift quality reflected the giver's respect for the recipient and the value placed on their relationship. Bernaburiash II's diplomatic activities extended beyond Egypt to include complex relationships with Assyria, whose expanding power posed increasing challenges to Babylonian territorial integrity. Cuneiform chronicles describe border conflicts in the region between the Tigris and the Zagros foothills, where Assyrian expansion threatened traditional Kassite grazing territories and trade routes. The Kassite response combined military action with diplomatic maneuvering, as Bernaburiash II sought to build coalitions with other powers threatened by Assyrian ambitions while strengthening his kingdom's defensive capabilities. The military innovations introduced during Bernaburiash II's reign reflected both the changing nature of Bronze Age warfare and the specific advantages that Kassite culture provided in mounted combat. Archaeological evidence from border fortifications shows development of specialized facilities for cavalry units, covered stables, training grounds, and workshops for maintaining horse equipment. These installations featured sophisticated ventilation systems and drainage arrangements, maintaining optimal conditions for the valuable war horses forming the backbone of Kassite military power. Kassite horse breeding programs during this period achieved remarkable success in developing animals suited for different military roles, from heavy cavalry mounts capable of carrying armored warriors to light reconnaissance horses prized for speed and endurance. The reputation of Kassite horses spread throughout the ancient world, with rulers from distant kingdoms requesting breeding stock and training expertise. But the Kassites weren't just warriors and diplomats, they were also scholars and cultural preservationists. And what they did next would ensure that ancient Mesopotamian civilization survived to influence our world today. The cultural achievements of Bernaburiash II's reign extended to literature and scholarship, as royal patronage supported the preservation and copying of ancient Mesopotamian texts, while encouraging development of new literary works incorporating Kassite themes and perspectives. The palace library at Dur-Kurigalzu contained one of the ancient world's largest collections of cuneiform tablets, including copies of the Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, and historical chronicles. Scribal schools attached to the library trained administrators in both Akkadian and Kassite languages while maintaining the literary traditions connecting the dynasty to Mesopotamian cultural heritage. This preservation work was crucial. Without Kassite scribes copying and preserving these ancient texts, much of what we know about Mesopotamian literature would have been lost forever. The preservation of Babylonian literary traditions under Kassite patronage proved crucial for the transmission of ancient Mesopotamian culture to later civilizations. Kassite scribes produced standardized versions of major literary works that became the basis for subsequent copies throughout the ancient Near East. Their editorial work included addition of commentaries and glosses explaining archaic terms and cultural references, making these ancient texts accessible to contemporary readers while preserving their essential content for future generations. Religious scholarship flourished under royal patronage, with temple schools producing theological treatises exploring relationships between Mesopotamian and Kassite deities, while developing sophisticated interpretive frameworks for understanding divine will through omens and divination. The synthesis of different religious traditions created new forms of ritual practice, satisfying both Babylonian urban populations and Kassite rural communities, contributing to the social cohesion characterizing the kingdom during its golden age. The economic prosperity supporting these cultural achievements rested on the kingdom's successful integration of agricultural production with pastoral activities and international commerce. Administrative records show systematic efforts to optimize land use through irrigation improvements, crop rotation schedules, and coordination of farming with livestock grazing. The result was agricultural productivity that not only fed the kingdom's growing population, but also generated substantial surpluses for export and royal projects. The emergence of the Kassite kingdom as a recognized member of the exclusive club of Late Bronze Age great powers represented one of the most remarkable diplomatic achievements of the ancient world. By the 14th century BC, Babylonia under Kassite rule had secured its position alongside Egypt, Hatti, Assyria, and Mitanni as one of the 5 superpowers whose interactions shaped the political landscape from the Aegean Sea to the Iranian plateau. This transformation from mountain tribal confederation to major international player required sophisticated diplomatic machinery and thorough understanding of complex protocols governing relations between ancient Near Eastern kingdoms. Think about it, within 200 years the Kassites had gone from unknown mountain tribesmen to equals of the pharaohs. It was one of history's most remarkable rises to power, but nothing lasts forever. The Late Bronze Age international system that had brought the Kassites such prestige was about to collapse. And when it did, the Kassites would face their greatest test. The question was, could they survive what was coming? The Kassite diplomatic service that emerged during Bernaburius II's reign operated according to well-established international conventions that had evolved over centuries of interstate contact. Royal correspondence preserved in archives from Egypt to Syria and Anatolia reveals a standardized diplomatic language employing specific formulaic expressions to convey different levels of respect, friendship, and political alignment. Kassite scribes mastered these conventions while adapting them to express their kingdom's particular interests and cultural perspectives, creating diplomatic documents that were both internationally comprehensible and distinctively Babylonian. The physical apparatus of Kassite diplomacy included specialized courier services maintaining regular communication with foreign courts despite considerable distances and challenging terrain involved in ancient travel. Messenger stations established at strategic intervals along major routes provided fresh horses, provisions, and security for diplomatic missions traveling between Babylon and distant capitals. These installations, identified through archaeological survey work along ancient highways, featured fortified compounds with stables, storage facilities, and accommodation for traveling officials and their retinues. Diplomatic missions themselves represented massive logistical undertakings requiring months of preparation and enormous financial resources. A single embassy to Egypt might include dozens of officials, guards, and servants, along with hundreds of pack animals carrying gifts, supplies, and the elaborate ceremonial equipment necessary for proper presentation at foreign courts. Cuneiform administrative texts describe the procurement of luxury goods specifically for diplomatic purposes, specially bred horses, precious textiles, exotic woods, and finely crafted weapons that would demonstrate Babylonian wealth and artistic sophistication to foreign audiences. The training of diplomatic personnel required extensive education in languages, customs, and political conditions throughout the known world. Kassite diplomatic schools attached to the royal administration in Dur-Kurigalzu and Babylon produced multilingual officials capable of conducting negotiations in Akkadian, Egyptian, Hittite, and other languages of international diplomacy. And these institutions maintained detailed intelligence files on foreign rulers, court factions, economic conditions, and military capabilities that enabled Kassite negotiators to craft proposals suited to specific political situations. This was intelligence gathering on a sophisticated scale. The Kassites understood that information was power, and they invested heavily in knowing everything about their rivals, allies, and potential enemies. Marriage diplomacy constituted perhaps the most complex and sensitive aspect of international relations during this period, as dynastic unions carried profound implications for territorial claims, succession rights, and religious practices. The negotiations surrounding proposed marriages between Kassite princesses and foreign princes involved intricate discussions of dowry arrangements, the legal status of children from such unions, and the maintenance of appropriate religious observances in foreign environments. Surviving marriage contracts reveal the extraordinary attention to detail required to address all potential sources of future conflict while preserving the dignity and interests of both royal houses. The correspondence between Bernaburius II and Amenhotep III regarding a proposed marriage alliance illustrates the delicate balance between political necessity and cultural sensitivity characterizing these negotiations. But beneath all this diplomatic sophistication, the Kassites maintained their military edge. Because in the ancient world, diplomacy without military power was just words, and the Kassites were about to prove they still knew how to fight. The integration of horse-drawn chariots into Kassite military formations marked a revolutionary development in Bronze Age warfare, as these vehicles provided unprecedented tactical mobility while serving as platforms for elite warriors equipped with composite bows and bronze-tipped spears. Archaeological excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu have revealed specialized workshops where skilled craftsmen assembled chariots using techniques combining Mesopotamian woodworking traditions with Kassite innovations in wheel construction and harness design. The discovery of bronze fittings decorated with horse motifs and mountain landscape scenes indicates the cultural significance that Kassites attached to these prestigious military vehicles. Chariot construction required access to diverse materials sourced from across the known world, seasoned hardwoods for wheel rims and axles, bronze for reinforcing elements and decorative fittings, and leather from specific animal species for harnesses and protective equipment. Administrative tablets from royal workshops document the procurement of cedar wood from Lebanon, elm from Anatolia, and specialized bronze alloys that provided optimal combinations of strength and flexibility for military applications. The complexity of these supply chains demonstrates the sophisticated logistical capabilities supporting Kassite military operations. Training of chariot crews involved intensive programs developing coordination between drivers and warriors while teaching the specialized skills required for mounted archery and spear combat from moving platforms. Cuneiform training manuals describe exercises designed to improve accuracy while shooting from chariots traveling at high speeds, with targets arranged at various distances and angles to simulate battlefield conditions. The emphasis on individual skill development reflected traditional Kassite values, while serving practical requirements of elite military units that operated as semi-independent tactical formations. Professional warrior classes emerged within Kassite society as military service became increasingly specialized and technically demanding. These elite soldiers, known by the Akkadian term kuradu, received extensive training in multiple weapon systems while maintaining the horses and equipment necessary for their military roles. Archaeological evidence from military installations shows residential quarters designed specifically for professional soldiers, with facilities for equipment maintenance, horse care, and weapons practice supporting year-round military readiness. The social status of professional warriors reflected their crucial importance to Kassite military effectiveness, with royal land grants and tax exemptions providing economic security for soldiers and their families. Legal documents from this period show warriors receiving hereditary estates that included not only agricultural land but also pasture rights and water access privileges essential for maintaining their military mounts. These arrangements created a military aristocracy with vested interests in supporting royal authority while maintaining the specialized skills necessary for effective military service. The integration of infantry formations with chariot units required tactical innovations, maximizing the advantages of both weapon systems while minimizing their respective vulnerabilities. Kassite military doctrine emphasized coordination between mounted and foot soldiers, with infantry providing protective screens for chariot operations while chariots delivered rapid strikes against enemy formations. Training exercises conducted at specialized military camps taught soldiers to operate effectively in combined arms formations that could adapt to different battlefield conditions and enemy tactics. The campaigns against the Sealand dynasty represented the first major test of Kassite military capabilities against organized opposition, and what happened next would prove that Kassites were more than diplomats and scholars. They were still the mountain warriors who had conquered Babylon generations earlier. The Sealand dynasty had maintained independence in southern Mesopotamia for over a century through a combination of natural defensive advantages and diplomatic maneuvering. The marshy terrain of the southern regions posed significant challenges for chariot operations, requiring Kassite commanders to develop new tactical approaches, emphasizing infantry assault supported by specialized watercraft capable of navigating the complex network of channels and lagoons protecting Sealand cities. Archaeological evidence from sites like and Eridu reveals extensive siege works dating to the Kassite conquest period, with earthwork fortifications, siege ramps, and artillery positions demonstrating sophisticated understanding of siege warfare techniques. The construction of these installations required enormous labor forces and engineering expertise, indicating the resources that Kassite rulers were willing to commit to achieving complete control over Babylonian territories. Excavated siege equipment includes bronze-reinforced battering rams, scaling ladders, and siege towers that enabled attackers to overcome the substantial defensive walls protecting major Sealand cities. The naval operations supporting Kassite campaigns in southern Mesopotamia required development of specialized watercraft and amphibious assault techniques adapted to the unique conditions of marsh warfare. Cuneiform texts describe construction of shallow draft vessels capable of carrying cavalry units and their mounts through reed-choked waterways, while larger ships transported siege equipment and supplies from bases in central Babylonia. The coordination of land and water operations demonstrated the tactical flexibility characterizing Kassite military planning throughout their expansionist period. The final conquest of the Sealand dynasty around 1460 BC marked the completion of Babylonian territorial unification under Kassite control, eliminating the last independent authority that had challenged royal administration since the collapse of Hammurabi's empire. The integration of former Sealand territories into the Kassite administrative system required careful attention to local conditions and established political arrangements, with former Sealand officials receiving positions within the expanded royal bureaucracy. This inclusive approach to territorial integration prevented the rebellions that might otherwise have disrupted the newly unified kingdom. The Kassites had done it. They had reunified Babylonia for the first time in over 150 years, but their borders were never secure. Border conflicts with Elam posed different challenges, requiring Kassite forces to operate in mountainous terrain similar to their ancestral homeland, but against enemies who possessed comparable knowledge of highland warfare techniques. The contested regions along the Diyala River Valley and the approaches to the Zagros passes had strategic importance far beyond their immediate economic value, as control of these areas determined access to trade routes connecting Mesopotamia with the Iranian plateau. Elamite raids against Babylonian territories threatened not only local populations, but also the commercial network supporting Kassite prosperity. The defensive fortifications constructed along the eastern frontier demonstrate sophisticated understanding of mountain warfare requirements, with installations positioned to control key passes while maintaining communication with supporting bases in the lowlands. Archaeological surveys have identified fortified positions featuring multiple defensive circuits, underground water supplies, and specialized facilities for maintaining cavalry units in harsh mountain conditions. These installations incorporated architectural techniques derived from traditional Kassite mountain fortresses, while adapting to the specific requirements of defending lowland territories against highland raiders. Kassite military responses to Elamite incursions combined defensive measures with offensive operations designed to eliminate enemy bases and demonstrate Babylonian power in contested regions. Cuneiform chronicles describe campaigns penetrating deep into Elamite territory, with Kassite forces conducting coordinated attacks against enemy settlements while avoiding pitched battles that might favor defenders familiar with local terrain. But the eastern frontier was just one problem. What was coming from the north would be far worse. The Assyrians were rising, and they were hungry for conquest. The control of overland trade routes became increasingly important as Kassite territorial expansion brought the kingdom into contact with commercial networks connecting distant regions of the ancient world. Military installations along major highways served dual purposes as defensive positions and customs stations, where royal officials could monitor commercial traffic while collecting revenues supporting military operations. The protection of merchant caravans became a major military responsibility, requiring regular patrols and maintenance of secure staging areas where traders could rest and resupply during long journeys. The development of specialized cavalry units for patrol and reconnaissance duties reflected the particular advantages that Kassite military culture provided in controlling extensive territorial holdings. These mounted formations could cover vast distances quickly while maintaining communication with fixed installations, enabling rapid response to threats or opportunities arising along the kingdom's extended borders. Training programs for cavalry units emphasized endurance riding, navigation skills, and the ability to operate independently for extended periods while maintaining discipline and effectiveness. The logistics of supporting military operations across such extensive territories required sophisticated supply systems that could deliver equipment, provisions, and replacement personnel to forces operating hundreds of kilometers from their bases. Administrative tablets document the establishment of supply depots, the procurement of military equipment, and the coordination of transport services, maintaining Kassite military effectiveness despite the enormous distances involved in frontier operations. The integration of conquered territories into the Kassite military system proceeded gradually, with local populations providing auxiliary forces while Kassite professionals maintained control of elite units and strategic positions. This approach maximized available manpower while preventing concentration of military power in potentially unreliable hands. Training programs for auxiliary forces emphasized loyalty to the royal house while teaching the tactical skills necessary for effective coordination with Kassite professional units. The technological innovations emerging from Kassite military experience included improvements in weapons manufacturing, fortification design, and cavalry equipment that influenced warfare throughout the ancient Near East. Bronze weapons produced in Kassite workshops achieved legendary status for their quality and effectiveness, with distinctive, decorative elements identifying their origin while serving practical functions in combat. The development of specialized horse equipment, improved bridles, saddles, and protective armor enhanced cavalry effectiveness while demonstrating the sophisticated understanding of equine biology characterizing Kassite military culture. The intelligence network supporting Kassite military operations extended throughout the known world, providing commanders with detailed information about enemy capabilities, political conditions, and potential opportunities for expansion. These networks included merchants, diplomats, and specialized agents who gathered information while conducting legitimate business activities, creating comprehensive intelligence pictures informing strategic planning and tactical decision-making. The training facilities established for Kassite military forces became models influencing military education throughout the ancient world, with foreign observers studying Kassite techniques and adapting them to their own military requirements. These institutions combined practical weapons training with theoretical instruction in tactics, logistics, and leadership, producing professional officers capable of commanding complex military operations. The emphasis on continuous learning and adaptation reflected the dynamic nature of ancient warfare while maintaining the cultural values distinguishing Kassite military traditions. But all this military sophistication would soon be tested, because the Golden Age was ending, and what came next would shake the Kassite kingdom to its foundations. The military conquests establishing Kassite hegemony across Mesopotamia created unprecedented opportunities for cultural exchange and religious synthesis, as the dynasty's rulers recognized that lasting political control required more than military dominance. The integration of diverse populations under Kassite authority necessitated sophisticated approaches to religious administration that could accommodate the spiritual needs of both traditional Babylonian communities and the growing Kassite settler population, while maintaining the divine legitimacy essential for royal authority in ancient Mesopotamian society. The Kassite approach to religious integration demonstrated remarkable pragmatism as rulers actively patronized traditional Babylonian deities while simultaneously promoting their ancestral mountain gods within the official pantheon. This dual religious policy created a complex theological framework satisfying different constituencies without compromising the essential spiritual foundations of either tradition. Archaeological evidence from temple complexes throughout the kingdom reveals architectural modifications designed to accommodate both Mesopotamian and Kassite ritual requirements, with traditional shrine layouts expanded to include specialized chambers for mountain religious practices. The restoration of Marduk's temple complex at Babylon represented the most visible symbol of Kassite commitment to Mesopotamian religious traditions, with successive rulers investing enormous resources in renovating and expanding the Esagila sanctuary, serving as the god's primary earthly residence. Excavations in the temple quarter have revealed construction layers dating to multiple Kassite reigns, with each phase of building activity incorporating both traditional Mesopotamian architectural elements and distinctive Kassite innovations. The throne room where Marduk's statue received daily offerings featured walls decorated with glazed brick reliefs depicting both Babylonian mythological scenes and Kassite royal symbols, creating visual narratives connecting divine authority with dynastic legitimacy. The daily ritual activities conducted at Esagila under Kassite patronage maintain traditional Mesopotamian ceremonial patterns, while incorporating elements derived from mountain religious practices. Cuneiform ritual texts describe offering ceremonies including traditional bread, beer, and animal sacrifices alongside distinctive Kassite contributions such as mare's milk, mountain honey, and specially prepared horse meat reserved for particular festivals. The integration of these diverse offerings required careful theological interpretation, ensuring compatibility with established religious doctrine while respecting Kassite cultural sensibilities. The priesthood administering Babylonian temples during the Kassite period reflected the dynasty's inclusive approach to religious authority, with traditional Mesopotamian clergy maintaining their established positions, while Kassite religious specialists received formal recognition within temple hierarchies. Training programs for priests incorporated instruction in both Akkadian and Kassite religious texts, creating a bilingual clerical class capable of serving the spiritual needs of diverse congregations. Archaeological discoveries of priestly libraries reveal collections including traditional Mesopotamian liturgical works alongside Kassite hymns and ritual instructions translated into cuneiform script. The renovation of Nippur's temple complex dedicated to Enlil, the ancient Mesopotamian god of air and divine authority, demonstrated Kassite understanding of the political implications of religious patronage. Enlil's cult had maintained paramount importance in Mesopotamian religion for over a millennium, with his temple serving as a crucial center for royal legitimization ceremonies and divine consultation. Kassite rulers invested heavily in restoring and expanding Nippur's religious facilities, constructing new shrine buildings and residential quarters for priests while maintaining the traditional ritual calendar regulating agricultural and political activities throughout Babylonia. But religious syncretism alone couldn't save them, because the world was changing and the Kassites were about to face challenges that would test everything they'd built. The preservation of Sumerian religious texts represented one of the most significant cultural achievements of Kassite rule, as royal scribal schools undertook systematic copying projects maintaining ancient liturgical works for future generations. These preservation efforts extended beyond simple reproduction to include scholarly commentaries and linguistic analyses, making archaic texts accessible to contemporary readers. The palace library at Dur-Kurigalzu contained one of the ancient world's most comprehensive collections of Sumerian religious literature, with standardized copies becoming authoritative versions for temples throughout Mesopotamia. The development of Kassite artistic styles in religious contexts reflected the synthesis of mountain and lowland cultural traditions, characterizing the dynasty's approach to cultural integration. Cylinder seals produced in royal workshops during this period featured iconographic programs combining traditional Mesopotamian divine symbols with Kassite motifs derived from their ancestral homeland. These miniature artworks typically depicted scenes of divine investiture where Mesopotamian gods granted authority to Kassite rulers, with mountain landscapes and horse imagery serving as visual references to the dynasty's cultural heritage. The technical execution of Kassite cylinder seals demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both Mesopotamian iconographic conventions and advanced stone-cutting techniques, producing exceptionally detailed and durable impressions. Archaeological analysis of seal impressions from administrative archives reveals use of specialized tools and polishing compounds achieving surface finishes superior to contemporary work from other regions. Sculptural works commissioned for temple decoration during the Kassite period displayed similar synthesis of artistic traditions, with relief carvings depicting traditional Mesopotamian religious scenes enhanced by distinctively Kassite stylistic elements. The treatment of human figures in these reliefs showed particular attention to costume details and physical characteristics, distinguishing Kassite nobility from traditional Babylonian aristocrats while maintaining formal conventions governing religious art throughout Mesopotamia. Animal representations, particularly horses and mountain wildlife, demonstrated exceptional naturalistic observation combined with symbolic meaning, connecting earthly creatures with divine authority. The production of religious sculpture required access to high-quality stone materials, often imported from distant quarries, creating supply networks connecting Kassite territories with specialized extraction sites throughout the ancient Near East. Administrative records document the procurement of black basalt from Syria, white limestone from the Zagros foothills, and colored marbles from Anatolia, providing raw materials for temple decoration projects. The transportation of these heavy materials over vast distances required sophisticated logistical planning and substantial financial resources, demonstrating royal commitment to religious construction projects. The architectural decoration of Kassite religious buildings incorporated glazed brick techniques, achieving new levels of artistic sophistication and durability. The production of glazed bricks required specialized kilns and chemical knowledge, combining traditional Mesopotamian ceramic techniques with innovations developed in Kassite workshops. Archaeological analysis of surviving glazed brick fragments reveals complex firing procedures and glaze compositions, producing brilliant colors and weather-resistant surfaces suitable for exterior architectural applications. The decorative programs executed in glazed brick typically featured geometric patterns, animal motifs, and royal insignia proclaiming dynastic authority while beautifying religious structures. The preservation and copying of Akkadian literary works under Kassite patronage contributed significantly to the transmission of Mesopotamian cultural heritage to later civilizations. Royal scribal schools established comprehensive copying programs, maintaining not only religious texts, but also historical chronicles, legal collections, and literary works, forming the foundation of Mesopotamian intellectual tradition. But all this cultural achievement was built on economic prosperity, and that prosperity was about to face its greatest challenge. The introduction of Kuduru boundary stones represented one of the most significant innovations in Mesopotamian land tenure, as these carved monuments established permanent legal documentation for royal land grants, while invoking divine protection for property rights. These stone markers, typically standing between 1 and 2 meters in height, featured elaborate relief carvings depicting the symbols of major Mesopotamian and Kassite deities, alongside detailed cuneiform inscriptions recording the specific terms of land grants. The iconographic programs on these monuments served both legal and religious functions, with divine symbols warning potential violators of supernatural punishment, while providing visual identification of the deities who sanctioned particular property arrangements. The production of Kuduru stones required specialized workshops combining advanced stone-cutting techniques with sophisticated legal and theological knowledge. Archaeological excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu have revealed evidence of royal workshops where skilled craftsmen carved these monuments using bronze tools and abrasive compounds, achieving exceptional detail in both relief sculpture and cuneiform inscription. The selection of stone materials for Kuduru production typically involved black basalt or dark limestone, providing durable surfaces capable of withstanding centuries of weathering while maintaining legible inscriptions and recognizable divine symbols. The legal framework governing Kuduru land grants established precedents that would influence Mesopotamian property law for centuries, with standardized formulaic language defining the rights and obligations associated with different types of land tenure. These grants typically included not only cultivated fields, but also associated water rights, pasture privileges, and exemptions from various royal taxes and labor obligations. The comprehensive nature of these property arrangements reflected the complex economic relationships characterizing Kassite society, where successful integration of agricultural and pastoral activities required careful coordination of diverse resource uses. The divine protection clauses appearing on Kuduru inscriptions invoked elaborate curse formulas designed to deter boundary violations and property disputes through supernatural sanctions. These curses typically called upon dozens of Mesopotamian and Kassite deities to afflict violators with diseases, military defeat, and social disgrace, creating comprehensive spiritual deterrents, complementing legal enforcement mechanisms. Agricultural innovations introduced during the Kassite period transformed Mesopotamian farming practices through improved irrigation techniques, crop rotation systems, and integration of livestock management with field cultivation. The administration of complex irrigation networks required sophisticated engineering knowledge and coordinated labor forces that could maintain canals, regulate water distribution, and prevent the salinization threatening agricultural productivity in the Babylonian alluvium. Cuneiform administrative texts describe systematic maintenance schedules for irrigation infrastructure, with specialized officials responsible for monitoring water levels, clearing blocked channels, and coordinating seasonal flooding patterns, renewing soil fertility. The development of new irrigation technologies included construction of mechanical lifting devices, enabling cultivation of previously marginal lands while reducing labor requirements for water management. Archaeological evidence from agricultural sites throughout Kassite territories reveals remains of Shaduf-style water lifts, animal-powered irrigation wheels, and sophisticated canal systems maximizing utilization of available water resources. These technological innovations required substantial initial investments in construction materials and skilled labor, but provided long-term increases in agricultural productivity, supporting population growth and urban development. The integration of pastoral activities with crop cultivation created mixed farming systems optimizing land use while providing diverse products for both local consumption and international trade. But this economic prosperity was built on a fragile foundation, and that foundation was about to crack. The sophisticated economic and administrative system sustaining Kassite prosperity for over 2 centuries began showing signs of strain during the latter half of the 13th century BC as internal succession disputes weakened central authority while external pressures mounted from resurgent neighboring powers. So the kingdom that had once projected military force across vast distances and maintained diplomatic parity with the great powers of the Bronze Age world found itself increasingly unable to respond effectively to multiple simultaneous challenges threatening its territorial integrity and economic foundations. The death of Natsi Marutash around 1274 BC precipitated a succession crisis exposing fundamental weaknesses in Kassite governmental structures as competing claimants to the throne mobilized different factions within the kingdom's complex tribal and administrative hierarchies. Traditional Kassite practice of selecting rulers through consultation between tribal elders and royal advisors had functioned effectively during periods of stability, but proved inadequate when faced with rapid decision-making required to address immediate military threats. Archaeological evidence from Dur Kurigalzu reveals signs of hasty fortification work during this period, with defensive walls reinforced using salvaged materials and temporary structures erected within the royal compound, suggesting preparations for siege conditions that never materialized but reflected the atmosphere of uncertainty gripping the capital. Kashtiliash IV's eventual accession around 1232 BC brought temporary stability to the succession question, but his reign coincided with the emergence of Assyria as an aggressive expansionist power under Shalmaneser Bapur, whose military reforms had created professional forces capable of sustained campaigns far from their homeland bases. The Assyrian king's systematic conquest of Mitannian territories during the 1260s brought Assyrian forces to within striking distance of traditional Babylonian spheres of influence, while his diplomatic correspondence with Egyptian and Hittite courts demonstrated his kingdom's emergence as a major player in Bronze Age international politics. The growing Assyrian threat materialized dramatically during the reign of Tukulti-Ninurta III, who ascended the Assyrian throne around 1244 BC with ambitious plans for territorial expansion, directly challenging Kassite control over northern Mesopotamian trade routes and agricultural territories. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on consolidating Assyrian control over their immediate neighbors, Tukulti-Ninurta possessed both the military resources and strategic vision necessary to mount sustained campaigns against major powers like Babylonia. His forces combined traditional Assyrian infantry formations with cavalry units and siege equipment incorporating the latest military technologies, while his administrative apparatus could support extended military operations through sophisticated logistical systems. The initial confrontations between Assyrian and Babylonian forces occurred along contested frontier regions where both kingdoms claimed authority over strategically important cities and agricultural districts. Kashtiliashthar attempted to maintain Kassite territorial claims through combination of diplomatic negotiation and limited military action, but found himself facing an opponent who viewed territorial expansion as essential for Assyrian security and prosperity. The Assyrian military machine that Tukulti-Ninurta had inherited and improved represented a fundamental challenge to traditional Kassite military advantages. Assyrian forces could match Babylonian cavalry capabilities while possessing superior siege equipment and more disciplined infantry formations. The decisive campaign bringing Assyrian forces to the gates of Babylon itself unfolded during the early years of Tukulti-Ninurta's reign, as coordinated Assyrian attacks overwhelmed Babylonian defensive positions along the Tigris Valley, while secondary forces advanced down the Euphrates, threatening the capital from multiple directions. What happened next would become one of the most humiliating moments in Kassite history, and it would mark the beginning of the end. Contemporary Assyrian chronicles describe systematic siege operations employing massive earthwork ramps, bronze-reinforced battering rams, and specialized assault towers, enabling attackers to overcome Babylon's ancient defensive walls. The archaeological record from this period shows extensive destruction layers in several Babylonian cities, with burned administrative buildings and collapsed defensive structures testifying to the effectiveness of Assyrian siege warfare. The capture of Babylon around 1225 BC represented one of the most shocking events in ancient Mesopotamian history, as the city serving as a symbol of political and religious authority for over a millennium fell to foreign conquest for the second time since the Hittite raid 6 centuries earlier. Tukulti-Ninurta's forces systematically looted the city's temples and palaces, carrying away enormous quantities of precious metals, luxury goods, and religious artifacts that had accumulated over generations of Kassite prosperity. Most significantly, the Assyrian king ordered removal of Marduk's cult statue from the Esagila temple, repeating the symbolic humiliation accompanying the earlier Hittite conquest and effectively proclaiming the end of Babylonian divine legitimacy. The deportation of Kashtiliash IV to Assyria eliminated the most visible symbol of Kassite resistance while demonstrating Assyrian determination to establish permanent control over Babylonian territories. Assyrian administrative documents describe the captured Babylonian king's treatment as a royal prisoner, with provisions made for his maintenance in comfortable captivity while his former kingdom underwent systematic reorganization under Assyrian supervision. The psychological impact of this royal captivity extended throughout Babylonian society, as traditional concepts of divine kingship struggled to accommodate the reality of their monarch's helplessness before foreign power. The Assyrian occupation of Babylon lasted approximately 7 years, during which Tukulti-Ninurta I attempted to establish direct administrative control over Babylonian territories through appointed governors and military garrisons stationed in major cities. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals modifications to existing governmental buildings accommodating Assyrian administrative practices, while cuneiform archives show introduction of Assyrian legal procedures and taxation systems disrupting traditional economic relationships. The occupation forces faced persistent resistance from local populations who viewed Assyrian rule as illegitimate, leading to costly military operations, straining Assyrian resources while failing to establish lasting political stability. The eventual Assyrian withdrawal from Babylon around 1218 BC resulted from a combination of internal Assyrian political difficulties and persistent costs of maintaining control over hostile territories hundreds of kilometers from their homeland bases. Rebellions in core Assyrian territories required Tukulti-Ninurta-Ptahshit to redeploy forces from Babylonian garrison duties, while the kingdom's extended military commitments had created financial strains threatening domestic stability. The assassination of Tukulti-Ninurta-Thutmose by his own son around 1208 BC eliminated the driving force behind Assyrian expansionism while creating succession disputes, preventing effective response to Babylonian recovery efforts. The Kassites had survived, barely. But the humiliation had been total, and worse was still to come. The restoration of Kassite authority following the Assyrian withdrawal proved more complex than simple military reoccupation, as the 7-year period of foreign rule had disrupted traditional administrative structures while creating new power centers challenging royal authority. Adad-Shuma-Usur, who emerged as the leading Kassite claimant during the restoration period, faced the enormous task of rebuilding governmental institutions while addressing the economic damage caused by Assyrian looting and administrative disruption. Contemporary documents describe systematic efforts to restore temple functions, rebuild damaged infrastructure, and re-establish the complex network of land grants and administrative appointments characterizing traditional Kassite governance. But the kingdom would never fully recover. The wounds were too deep. The damage was too extensive, and the final blow was coming from a direction nobody expected. The return of Marduk's cult statue to Babylon represented a crucial symbolic victory for the restored Kassite regime, as this religious restoration demonstrated divine approval for the dynasty's continued rule while providing psychological reassurance to populations traumatized by foreign occupation. The elaborate ceremonies accompanying Marduk's restoration followed traditional Mesopotamian protocols while incorporating elements emphasizing Kassite resistance to foreign domination. Temple records from this period describe massive expenditures on restoration activities, with precious metals and luxury goods donated by wealthy individuals who sought to demonstrate their loyalty to the restored monarchy while contributing to the kingdom's spiritual recovery. The internal succession disputes that had facilitated Assyrian conquest continued to plague Kassite governance throughout the 12th century BC as competing branches of the royal family mobilized different tribal and regional constituencies in struggles for political control. The traditional Kassite emphasis on consultation and consensus building, which had provided stability during earlier periods, proved inadequate for addressing rapid decision-making required to respond to external threats and internal challenges. Archaeological evidence from royal residences shows signs of fortification and defensive preparation, suggesting ongoing concerns about internal security, while administrative archives reveal declining central authority over provincial governors, who increasingly operated as autonomous rulers. The fragmentation of central authority created opportunities for local strongmen and tribal leaders to establish independent power bases, challenging royal control over taxation, military recruitment, and judicial administration. Cuneiform legal documents from this period show increasing numbers of disputes between different authorities with competing claims over land rights, water access, and commercial privileges, creating legal chaos, undermining economic stability. The breakdown of unified legal administration particularly affected commercial activities, as merchants faced uncertain legal environments, increasing transaction costs while reducing the predictability essential for long-distance trade operations. The weakening of Kassite military capabilities during this period reflected both direct losses suffered during the Assyrian conquest and ongoing internal disputes preventing effective coordination of defensive preparations. The kingdom's traditional military advantages in cavalry warfare became less significant as neighboring powers developed comparable mounted forces while improving their siege capabilities and infantry tactics. Archaeological evidence from border fortifications shows declining maintenance standards and reduced garrison sizes, suggesting systematic deterioration of defensive capabilities, leaving Babylonian territories vulnerable to external attack. The Elamite kingdom, which had maintained generally peaceful relations with Kassite Babylonia during the height of the dynasty's power, began launching increasingly aggressive raids into eastern Babylonian territories as Kassite military weakness became apparent. These incursions initially focused on border regions where Elamite forces could strike quickly and withdraw before Babylonian reinforcements arrived, but gradually expanded to include attacks on major cities and agricultural centers that had previously been secure from external threat. The Elamite military organization, which combined mountain warfare techniques with innovations borrowed from Mesopotamian military traditions, proved particularly effective against weakened Kassite defensive forces. Elamite raids during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC targeted the agricultural infrastructure supporting Babylonian urban centers with systematic destruction of irrigation systems, granaries, and livestock herds, creating lasting economic damage extending far beyond immediate military losses. The psychological impact of these raids extended throughout Babylonian society as populations that had enjoyed security for generations found themselves vulnerable to sudden attack and economic devastation. The end was coming. Everyone could feel it. The question was no longer if the Kassite kingdom would fall, but when. And who would deliver the final blow? The disruption of eastern trade routes by Elamite military activities eliminated one of the traditional sources of Kassite prosperity, as merchant caravans could no longer safely traverse the territories connecting Mesopotamian markets with Iranian plateau trading centers. The loss of access to luxury goods from Central Asia, precious stones from Afghanistan, and metals from Iranian mining districts forced Babylonian craftsmen to seek alternative supply sources that were often more expensive and less reliable. Archaeological evidence from craft workshops during this period shows declining production levels and reduced quality standards, reflecting both material shortages and economic uncertainty, discouraging investment in specialized manufacturing. The collapse of Late Bronze Age international trading systems during the late 13th and early 12th centuries BC created additional pressures on Kassite economic foundations as the complex network of commercial relationships supporting the kingdom's prosperity disintegrated under the impact of widespread political instability and military conflict. The destruction of major trading centers like Ugarit, the decline of Hittite power in Anatolia, and internal difficulties affecting Egyptian commercial activities eliminated many of the markets that had absorbed Babylonian exports while providing essential imports. The Sea Peoples' migrations and attacks, which disrupted Mediterranean trading networks and contributed to the collapse of several Bronze Age civilizations, had indirect but significant impacts on Babylonian economic conditions through disruption of long-distance commercial relationships. Although the Sea Peoples themselves never directly threatened Mesopotamian territories, their destruction of coastal trading centers and their impact on Egyptian and Hittite commercial capabilities reduced demand for Babylonian luxury goods while eliminating sources of imported materials that Kassite craftsmen had incorporated into their products. The economic difficulties resulting from disrupted trade networks created domestic pressures, further weakening Kassite governmental authority, as declining royal revenues reduced resources available for military defense, administrative operations, and public works projects that had traditionally demonstrated royal power and legitimacy. Tax collection became increasingly difficult as agricultural productivity declined and commercial activities contracted, while costs of maintaining defensive forces and governmental apparatus continued to consume substantial resources. The resulting fiscal crisis forced Kassite rulers to make difficult choices between competing priorities, often leading to decisions satisfying immediate needs while creating longer-term problems. The social consequences of economic decline included increased migration from rural areas to urban centers as agricultural populations sought security and economic opportunities in cities that were themselves struggling with reduced commercial activity and declining governmental services. This internal migration created overcrowding in urban areas while reducing agricultural productivity in abandoned rural districts, contributing to food shortages and social unrest, further undermining political stability. Archaeological evidence from major cities during this period shows expansion of residential areas beyond traditional city walls, suggesting rapid population growth, straining existing infrastructure and services. The breakdown of traditional social hierarchies accelerated during this period of crisis, as economic disruption and political uncertainty created opportunities for social mobility, while undermining the established relationships that had maintained stability during the kingdom's prosperous period. Merchant families that had accumulated wealth during earlier periods found their commercial networks disrupted, while military officers and administrative officials faced uncertain career prospects in a contracting governmental system. The result was increased social competition and conflict, diverting energy from collective responses to external threats, while creating additional sources of internal instability. The religious implications of Kassite decline included challenges to traditional concepts of divine kingship and royal legitimacy that had provided ideological foundations for the dynasty's authority. And then came Shutruk-Nahunte, the Elamite king who would finish what the Assyrians had started, the man who would end 400 years of Kassite rule forever. The cultural and administrative deterioration characterizing the late Kassite period accelerated dramatically during the final decades of the 12th century BC, as successive rulers proved unable to address the mounting challenges threatening the kingdom's survival. Melishipak's reign, beginning around 1186 BC, coincided with renewed Elamite aggression under Shutruk-Nahunte, whose military campaigns represented a fundamental shift from opportunistic raiding to systematic conquest aimed at establishing permanent Elamite control over Babylonian territories. Unlike earlier Elamite incursions focusing on capturing livestock and portable wealth, Shutruk-Nahunte's forces targeted the symbolic and administrative centers of Kassite power with methodical precision, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of Mesopotamian political structures. Archaeological evidence from sites throughout eastern Babylonia reveals the systematic nature of Elamite military operations during this period, with destruction layers showing coordinated attacks on administrative buildings, temple complexes, and defensive installations, eliminating the infrastructure necessary for organized resistance. The Elamite forces employed siege techniques combining traditional mountain warfare methods with innovations borrowed from Mesopotamian military traditions, using specialized equipment to breach defensive walls while maintaining the mobility advantages characterizing their earlier raiding activities. Excavations at sites like Sippar and Nippur show evidence of intensive siege operations, with earthwork ramps, siege tunnels, and artillery positions enabling systematic reduction of fortified positions. The capture of Babylon itself around 1158 BC marked the culmination of Shutruk-Nahunte's conquest campaign and effectively ended 4 centuries of Kassite rule over Mesopotamia. Contemporary Elamite chronicles describe the systematic looting of the city's temples and palaces, with particular attention to removing religious artifacts and royal monuments symbolizing Babylonian political and spiritual authority. The Elamite forces carried away thousands of cuneiform tablets from royal and temple archives, eliminating crucial administrative records while disrupting the institutional memory sustaining governmental operations for generations. Most significantly, They removed the cult statues of major Mesopotamian deities, including Marduk himself, in a deliberate attempt to sever the spiritual connections legitimizing Babylonian royal authority. The deportation of royal statues and monuments to Susa represented more than simple military plunder, as these objects served as tangible symbols of political legitimacy that Elamite rulers could display as evidence of their victory over ancient Mesopotamian civilization. The famous Code of Hammurabi, which had stood in Babylon for over 6 centuries as a symbol of legal authority and royal justice, was among the monuments transported to the Elamite capital, where it remained until its rediscovery by French archaeologists in the early 20th century. Victory steles commemorating Kassite military achievements, boundary stones marking royal land grants, and cult objects from major temples all disappeared into Elamite collections, proclaiming the complete subjugation of their traditional enemies. The systematic removal of these cultural artifacts created a spiritual and administrative crisis extending far beyond immediate military defeat, as Babylonian society struggled to maintain traditional religious and governmental practices without the physical objects anchoring these activities for centuries. Temple priests found themselves unable to conduct daily rituals requiring specific cult statues, while legal proceedings became complicated by the absence of authoritative legal monuments and administrative records. The psychological impact of this cultural devastation proved as damaging as immediate military losses, as populations maintaining their identity through connection to ancient traditions found themselves severed from the material foundations of their civilization. This was the end. After 400 years, longer than any foreign dynasty in Mesopotamian history, the Kassites were finished. But their story wasn't quite over yet. Enlil-nadin-Ahi's brief reign following the Elamite conquest represented a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of Kassite authority in the face of overwhelming foreign domination. Archaeological evidence suggests his administration operated from temporary centers outside traditional capitals, using salvaged administrative records and improvised governmental procedures to maintain basic functions. However, the loss of the kingdom's economic base, combined with absence of the religious legitimacy that had traditionally supported royal authority, made effective governance nearly impossible. Administrative tablets from this period show declining tax revenues, reduced military capabilities, and gradual breakdown of the complex bureaucratic systems characterizing Kassite administration during its golden age. The final elimination of Kassite royal authority came with Shutruk-Nahunta's capture and deportation of the last Kassite king around 1155 BC, ending a dynasty that had ruled Babylonia longer than any other foreign power in Mesopotamian history. Unlike earlier conquests resulting in replacement of one ruling dynasty with another, the Elamite victory created a prolonged period of political fragmentation during which no single authority could establish effective control over former Kassite territories. Local governors, tribal chieftains, and military commanders carved out autonomous regions while acknowledging nominal Elamite overlordship, lacking the administrative apparatus necessary for direct governance. It was over. The Kassites were gone, but Babylon itself would survive. The restoration of Babylonian independence under Nebuchadnezzar I around 1125 BC marked a crucial turning point in Mesopotamian political history, as this energetic ruler successfully mobilized resources necessary to challenge Elamite domination while establishing new foundations for Babylonian royal authority. His military campaigns against Elam employed innovative tactics combining traditional Mesopotamian siege warfare with guerrilla techniques adapted to mountain terrain, enabling Babylonian forces to operate effectively in the challenging geographical conditions that had previously favored Elamite defenders. The successful siege of Susa and recovery of Marduk's cult statue represented both practical military achievements and powerful symbolic victories, demonstrating the restoration of divine favor for Babylonian rule. Nebuchadnezzar's recovery of stolen cultural artifacts from Elamite collections provided tangible evidence of Babylonian resurgence while addressing the spiritual crisis accompanying the loss of traditional religious objects. The elaborate ceremonies marking Marduk's return to Babylon followed ancient protocols while incorporating new elements celebrating the kingdom's liberation from foreign domination. Temple records describe massive popular celebrations continuing for weeks, with processions, sacrificial offerings, and ritual performances reinforcing social cohesion while proclaiming the restoration of traditional Mesopotamian civilization under native rule. The Kassites were gone, but they had left their mark. The administrative reforms implemented by Nebuchadnezzar I and his successors drew heavily upon Kassite governmental innovations while adapting these systems to changed political and economic conditions. The Kuduru boundary stone system, which had provided legal frameworks for land tenure during the Kassite period, continued under the Second Dynasty of Izin, with modifications addressing territorial disruptions caused by foreign conquest and population displacement. Royal land grants to military officers and administrative officials followed Kassite precedents, while incorporating new provisions reflecting lessons learned from the dynasty's collapse. But the real question is, what did the Kassites leave behind? After 400 years ruling Mesopotamia, what was their legacy? The long-term impact of Kassite rule on Babylonian culture proved remarkably durable, as many innovations introduced during their 4-century dominion became permanent features of Mesopotamian civilization. The integration of cavalry warfare techniques into Babylonian military doctrine continued throughout subsequent periods, with horse breeding and training programs maintaining the standards established during the Kassite Golden Age. Archaeological evidence from later periods shows continued use of architectural techniques developed in Kassite royal workshops, particularly construction methods, combining traditional Mesopotamian building practices with structural innovations derived from mountain fortress design. Legal traditions established during the Kassite period influenced Mesopotamian jurisprudence for centuries after the dynasty's fall, with precedents set in Kassite courts providing foundations for subsequent legal developments. So the emphasis on written documentation characterizing Kassite administrative practice contributed to preservation of legal records, enabling later scholars to maintain continuity in judicial procedures despite political disruptions. Property law concepts developed for managing complex relationships between agricultural and pastoral activities continued to influence land tenure arrangements throughout the first millennium BC. Religious syncretism achieved during the Kassite period created lasting theological frameworks influencing Mesopotamian religious practice long after the dynasty's disappearance. The integration of mountain deities into the Mesopotamian pantheon provided models for subsequent religious adaptations, while architectural innovations developed for temples serving both Babylonian and Kassite communities influenced religious construction throughout the region. Ritual practices combining different cultural traditions continued in modified forms, contributing to the religious diversity characterizing later Mesopotamian civilization. The preservation of Sumerian and Akkadian literary works under Kassite patronage proved crucial for the transmission of ancient Mesopotamian culture to subsequent civilizations. The standardized texts produced in Kassite scribal schools became authoritative versions influencing all later copies, while the scholarly apparatus developed to make ancient works accessible to contemporary readers provided models for subsequent literary preservation efforts. The Epic of Gilgamesh, mathematical treatises, astronomical observations, and historical chronicles all survived in forms established during the Kassite period, enabling their eventual transmission to Greek, Islamic, and modern scholars. Archaeological rediscovery of Kassite sites began during the 19th century as European excavations at Babylon and other Mesopotamian cities uncovered evidence of their 4th-century rule. The identification of Dur-Kurigalzu as a major Kassite capital provided crucial insights into their urban planning, architectural innovations, and administrative systems that had been largely unknown from textual sources alone. Systematic excavations conducted throughout the 20th century revealed the extent of Kassite territorial control and the sophistication of their governmental apparatus, fundamentally revising scholarly understanding of late Bronze Age Mesopotamian history. The decipherment of Kassite personal names and administrative terminology in cuneiform archives provided linguistic evidence confirming their non-Semitic origins while revealing the extent of their cultural adaptation to Mesopotamian civilization. Comparative studies of Kassite language elements with other ancient languages of the Iranian plateau suggested possible connections to broader Indo-European or pre-Indo-European linguistic families, though the limited corpus of available data prevents definitive classification. The bilingual nature of Kassite administration, documented through thousands of cuneiform tablets, demonstrates their successful integration of different cultural traditions within unified governmental systems. But what's the final verdict? How should we remember the Kassites? Modern understanding of Kassite civilization has been enhanced by interdisciplinary research, combining archaeological excavation with textual analysis, environmental studies, and comparative historical investigation. Climate data derived from ice cores and sediment analysis has provided insights into the environmental conditions influencing Kassite agricultural practices and territorial expansion. Metallurgical studies of surviving artifacts have revealed the technical innovations contributing to their military and economic success. Demographic studies based on settlement patterns and cemetery excavations have illuminated population movements and social structures shaping Kassite society throughout their historical trajectory. The recognition of Kassite achievements in international diplomacy has grown as scholars have gained access to archives from Egypt, Assyria, and Anatolia, documenting their participation in Bronze Age great power politics. The Amarna letters and other diplomatic correspondence reveal the sophistication of Kassite foreign policy and their success in maintaining political independence while participating in complex international relationships. Their contributions to the development of diplomatic protocol, commercial regulation, and conflict resolution provided foundations for international relations influencing subsequent civilizations throughout the ancient world. The Kassite legacy in Mesopotamian history represents one of the most successful examples of cultural synthesis in the ancient world, as foreign rulers managed to maintain political control while preserving and enhancing the civilizational achievements of their predecessors. Their 4th-century dominion over Babylonia created institutional framework surviving their political collapse, contributing to the continuity of Mesopotamian civilization despite repeated foreign conquests and internal disruptions. The administrative innovations, cultural achievements, and diplomatic precedents established during Kassite rule provided foundations supporting Mesopotamian civilization throughout its subsequent history, ensuring that their influence extended far beyond their immediate chronological boundaries. The final assessment of Kassite rule must acknowledge both their remarkable achievements and the factors ultimately leading to their downfall. Their success in creating a stable, prosperous kingdom lasting longer than most ancient dynasties demonstrates exceptional political and administrative capabilities, while their cultural contributions enriched Mesopotamian civilization in ways that proved permanent. However, their inability to adapt effectively to the changing international conditions of the late Bronze Age, combined with internal succession disputes weakening central authority, created vulnerabilities that more aggressive neighbors could exploit. The Kassite experience thus provides valuable insights into both the possibilities and limitations of foreign rule in ancient civilizations, illustrating how successful cultural adaptation could create lasting achievements, while political inflexibility could lead to catastrophic collapse. Their story is one of remarkable success, followed by tragic failure. Mountain warriors who conquered Mesopotamia, ruled it longer than any other foreign dynasty, achieved diplomatic parity with the great powers of their age, preserved ancient literature for future generations, and then lost everything when they failed to adapt to a changing world. But here's what's remarkable. The Kassites failed politically, but they succeeded culturally. Long after their kingdom fell, their innovations persisted, their legal systems continued, their architectural techniques endured, their literary preservation efforts ensured that Sumerian and Akkadian works survived to influence Western civilization. The Code of Hammurabi that Shutruk-Nahunta carried away to Susa. We only know about it today because the Elamites preserved it. The Epic of Gilgamesh that we read today, it survived in standardized copies made by Kassite scribes. The diplomatic protocols governing international relations, established partly through Kassite innovations. So did the Kassites fail? Militarily, yes. Politically, yes. But culturally, they achieved a form of immortality that most conquerors never attain. The archaeological evidence for Kassite material culture reveals a people who successfully maintained their cultural identity while fully participating in Mesopotamian civilization. The distinctive pottery styles, bronze weapons with unique decorative motifs, and architectural innovations combining mountain and lowland traditions all testify to their ability to preserve ancestral traditions while adapting to new environments. The Kuduru boundary stones, with their elaborate divine symbols and bilingual inscriptions, stand as lasting monuments to the Kassite achievement of creating hybrid legal and religious systems satisfying both communities. These carved stones, scattered across museum collections worldwide, represent perhaps the most visible legacy of Kassite rule, tangible evidence of their sophisticated approach to cultural integration. The economic innovations introduced during the Kassite period transformed Mesopotamian agricultural practices in ways that persisted long after their dynasty's fall. Their expertise in integrating pastoral activities with crop cultivation created mixed farming systems, optimizing land use while providing diverse products for both local consumption and international trade. The irrigation technologies they developed, mechanical lifting devices, animal-powered wheels, sophisticated canal systems continued to be used throughout later periods of Mesopotamian history. Their horse breeding programs established standards of excellence that influenced cavalry development throughout the ancient Near East for centuries. The military innovations pioneered by the Kassites, systematic cavalry training programs, combined arms tactics integrating chariots with infantry, specialized fortifications accommodating mounted troops, became standard features of Mesopotamian warfare long after their political power disappeared. Their emphasis on horsemanship and mobile warfare influenced military thinking throughout the region, contributing to tactical developments that would shape ancient Near Eastern conflicts for the remainder of antiquity. The training facilities they established became models for military education, while their strategic emphasis on controlling trade routes through military installations serving dual defensive and commercial functions provided templates for subsequent kingdoms. The Kassite approach to religious integration, active patronage of traditional Mesopotamian deities while maintaining their ancestral gods, architectural innovations accommodating different ritual requirements, bilingual clergy serving diverse congregations, created models for religious tolerance that influenced subsequent periods of foreign rule in Mesopotamia. Their success in achieving religious legitimacy despite their foreign origins demonstrated that effective governance required more than military conquest. It demanded genuine respect for local traditions, combined with willingness to adapt foreign practices to local conditions. The scribal traditions established in Kassite educational institutions continued to influence Mesopotamian intellectual life long after the dynasty's disappearance. The emphasis on bilingual education, the systematic copying of ancient texts, the development of scholarly commentaries and lexical aids, all these practices pioneered or expanded during Kassite rule became permanent features of Mesopotamian scribal culture. The palace and temple libraries they established, particularly at Dur-Kurigalzu, served as models for subsequent library development, while their standardized text editions became authoritative versions used throughout later Mesopotamian history. Perhaps most significantly, the Kassite experience demonstrates the complex dynamics of cultural contact and integration in the ancient world. Their transformation from mountain pastoralists to rulers of civilization's heartland required remarkable flexibility and adaptability. They learned Akkadian while maintaining Kassite. They worshipped Marduk while honoring Shukamuna. They built ziggurats using Mesopotamian designs enhanced with mountain architectural techniques. They negotiated with Egyptian pharaohs as equals while maintaining tribal councils for local governance. They were neither purely Kassite nor purely Babylonian. They were something new, something hybrid, something uniquely adapted to the challenges of ruling a diverse empire in the late Bronze Age world. And in that hybridity lay both their greatest strength and their ultimate vulnerability. The collapse of Kassite power during the 12th century BC formed part of the broader Bronze Age collapse affecting civilizations throughout the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. The systemic disruptions to international trade networks, the migrations of displaced populations, the emergence of new military technologies, and the breakdown of established diplomatic relationships all contributed to creating conditions in which even successful, long-established kingdoms could fail catastrophically. The Kassites were not unique in their collapse. The Hittite Empire, Mycenaean Greece, and numerous smaller kingdoms all disappeared during this same period of crisis. What distinguished the Kassite experience was the length of their prior success and the extent of their cultural integration into Mesopotamian society. 400 years is an extraordinarily long time for any dynasty to maintain power, let alone a foreign one ruling over culturally sophisticated populations with their own ancient traditions. The fact that Kassite rule lasted so long testifies to the effectiveness of their administrative systems, the wisdom of their religious policies, and the genuine benefits their governance provided to Babylonian populations. They weren't simply extractive conquerors, they were partners in maintaining and developing Mesopotamian civilization. The ultimate failure of the Kassite kingdom resulted from a combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures that no amount of administrative sophistication or cultural adaptation could overcome. The succession disputes weakening central authority, the rising power of aggressive neighbors like Assyria and Elam, the disruption of international trade networks supporting their prosperity, and the changing military technologies reducing their cavalry advantages, all these factors combined to create perfect conditions for catastrophic collapse. In retrospect, the remarkable thing is not that the Kassites eventually fell, but that they lasted as long as they did. The memory of Kassite rule persisted in Mesopotamian tradition long after their dynasty's disappearance. Later, Babylonian chronicles recorded their kings in official king lists, preserving their place in the legitimate succession of Mesopotamian rulers. The Kuduru stones they erected continued to mark property boundaries and invoked their legal precedents. The architectural techniques they pioneered continued to influence building practices. The literary texts they preserved remained authoritative. In these ways, the Kassites achieved a form of cultural immortality transcending their political failure. The rediscovery of Kassite civilization by modern archaeologists has revealed the extent of their achievements and their importance in ancient Near Eastern history. The excavations at Dur-Kurigalzu, the decipherment of Kassite language elements in cuneiform texts, the analysis of diplomatic correspondence revealing their international prestige, the recognition of their contributions to literary preservation, all these discoveries have transformed scholarly understanding of the late Bronze Age Mesopotamian world. The Kassites are no longer mysterious barbarian conquerors, but sophisticated rulers who successfully navigated the complex challenges of governing a diverse empire while maintaining cultural continuity with ancient traditions. For modern audiences, the Kassite story offers valuable lessons about cultural integration, the challenges of foreign rule, and the complex dynamics of political legitimacy in multicultural societies. Their success in maintaining power for 4 centuries while preserving both their own identity and Mesopotamian traditions demonstrates that cultural adaptation need not mean cultural surrender. Their eventual failure reminds us that even the most successful political systems can collapse when faced with systemic crises beyond their capacity to manage. Their cultural legacy surviving their political defeat shows that civilizational achievements can transcend the kingdoms that created them. The Kassites ruled Mesopotamia for 400 years. That's longer than the Ottoman Empire, longer than the Roman Empire in the West, longer than the United States has existed, and though their kingdom fell, their contributions endured in laws, in architecture, in literature, in military traditions, in the very fabric of Mesopotamian civilization that they had adopted, adapted, and enhanced. The final chapter of the Kassite story reminds us that history judges civilizations not only by their military conquests or political longevity, but by their contributions to human culture and knowledge. The Kassites conquered Babylonia through a combination of military skill, diplomatic acumen, and patient infiltration. They legitimized their rule through religious restoration and administrative innovation. They achieved international prestige through sophisticated diplomacy and cultural patronage. They maintained power for 4 centuries through effective governance and genuine respect for Mesopotamian traditions. And when they fell, they left behind a legacy that transcended their political defeat. The Code of Hammurabi survives today because it was preserved, ironically, through Elamite conquest. The Epic of Gilgamesh reaches modern readers in standardized versions created by Kassite scribes. Mesopotamian mathematical and astronomical knowledge survived partly through Kassite copying programs. The architectural techniques they developed influenced building practices throughout the region for centuries, and the legal traditions they established shaped property law long after their kingdom disappeared. The diplomatic protocols they pioneered contributed to international relation systems persisting into later periods. The military innovations they introduced transformed ancient Near Eastern warfare. These aren't minor footnotes to history, these are fundamental contributions to human civilization. The archaeological remains of Kassite civilization, the massive ziggurat at Dur-Kurigalzu, the elaborately carved Kuduru stones, the palace complexes combining Mesopotamian and mountain architectural traditions, the thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting their administration, all testify to a people who successfully bridged 2 worlds. They came from the Zagros Mountains as tribal warriors and pastoralists, and they became sophisticated rulers of civilization's heartland. They spoke a language that belonged to no known family, yet mastered Akkadian to conduct diplomacy with the great powers of their age. They worshipped mountain gods, yet restored Marduk to his temple. They maintained tribal councils, yet created bureaucratic systems rivaling any ancient state. They were outsiders who became insiders without losing themselves in the process. That's the real Kassite achievement, not just that they ruled Mesopotamia for 400 years, but that they did so while maintaining their identity and enriching the civilization they governed. They took the best of both worlds, mountain warrior traditions and Mesopotamian administrative sophistication, Kassite religious practices and Babylonian theological frameworks, pastoral expertise and agricultural knowledge, and created something new. Something hybrid, something that worked for 4 centuries and left lasting influences that shaped Mesopotamian civilization long after their political power vanished. So when you think of the Kassites, don't just remember the mysterious mountain people who conquered Babylon. Remember the diplomats who negotiated as equals with pharaohs. Remember the scribes who preserved ancient literature for future generations. Remember the architects who built Dur-Kurigalzu. Remember the legal innovators who created the Kuduru system. Remember the military reformers who revolutionized cavalry warfare. Remember the religious leaders who successfully integrated different theological traditions. Remember the administrators who governed effectively for 400 years. Remember the cultural synthesizers who proved that foreign rulers could preserve and enhance the civilizations they conquered. The Kassites ruled Mesopotamia longer than any other foreign dynasty in history. They rose from obscurity to international prestige. They fell to invasion and internal weakness, but they left behind a legacy that shaped Mesopotamian civilization for centuries and ultimately contributed to the cultural heritage of the entire ancient world. From the Zagros Mountains to the throne of Babylon, that's the Kassite journey. And it's one of the most remarkable stories in ancient history. If this epic 400-year saga of conquest, cultural synthesis, and lasting legacy has captivated you, subscribe to Flow of History, because understanding how foreign conquerors became cultural preservationists helps us appreciate the complex dynamics that shape civilizations across the ages.